is Norwich Confidential with your hosts, Dr. Ben Hong, Bonnie Hong, and Mr. Bob Farwell.
Here you are.
Good evening.
Good
I'm
evening.
Bonnie Hong.
And I'm Ben Hong.
And we're just seeing each other for the first time this evening in,
And,
4 days? You've been away in Boston at a conference?
I'm back to school, but tonight is Norwich Confidential.
Yes.
And we're going to have a very interesting topic tonight. And this has something to do with our elected officials and what happened to them after they get out of politics. So there's life after politics is what I would call that. Now this happens very much in, of course, in our national government. But I'm not really sure if it also happens in the state side of government. What we are talking, or going to be talking tonight, is this thing called revolving doors.
The revolving door is a practice that occurs particularly on the national level where elected officials, once they are out of office, find a job with one of the consulting firms that work in an area that they have certain expertise. I think if you remember when Senator Alston was here with us, we talked about the representative from, or the senator, I guess, from Louisiana, that as soon as she was she did not get reelected, and within 3 months I had received this letter from her saying but don't worry, I'll still be in Washington. I'm now going to be working for this company with another of the representatives that wasn't reelected, lobbying for the oil companies, which is why she was not reelected. So.
Well, and this is something that happens on almost everyone. I remember very well that when Secretary Principi was the Secretary of the Department of the VA in Washington, and of course after he left, he became a consultant for Pfizer, here in Pfizer, obviously to lobby the sale of Pfizer products for the VA. Now, I'm not really sure what the ethics or conflict of interest here is, because I don't know the law exactly on how it is stated. And I'm not really sure if it is legal. I'm sure it probably is legal for them to just all of a sudden, on day, when they end their term, on the first day, they become a lobbyist.
Well, didn't Elon Musk have some comments about one of the officials in Washington?
That's right. Well, that is one of the, I think, the major issue that at the time that Elon Musk was trying to get the contract from the military, the Air Force, and that is to get a contract for his spaceships to fly and bring supply to the space station. And the staff or the person, the deputy who made the decision, basically came to him and asked him for a job, and with the kind of implied statement that if he does get a job from Elon Musk's organization, that he will approve that.
Right, Star X or whatever, Spaceship X would get the contract for the...
Right, and so Elon Musk said no, he's not going to hire him, and so this deputy went to Boeing and then awarded Boeing this huge space contract. And true enough, within a few months, when he retired from the department, the Air Force, he became the vice president of this Boeing space program. So it's one of those. And of course, we very well know what happened with Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney was...
Back and forth from Halliburton?
Well, I'm not even sure that while he was still vice president, when he was managing Halliburton to get the government contract. So there is this kind of very nice connection between our elected officials that right after they get elected, or right after they retire, whether they retire voluntarily or did not get reelected, that the revolving door is that they become an employee huge salary from these corporations who basically whose product is to be sold to the United States government. And
Right.
they become the main lobbyists because obviously their connections with everybody, they know very well who the players are to make those decisions, and immediately it becomes a conflict of interest. Now, you might say, and you might think that, well, what about those that are in their committee or in their chair or so on? Why aren't they putting a block on this? Well, like you said, it's a revolving door. When their time comes for them to retire also, they want to, of course...
They want to have a job.
Have a job also.
But I think the implication for all of this is much, much deeper. When you have that much influence with a corporation, the corporations then have that much more influence in how our government passes certain legislation that benefit those particular corporations. Contracts are obviously given with preference to those corporations. To give you some facts, all of these sheets of paper are the number of former senators and representatives that are now lobbyists in the U.S. government. There are currently 427 former senators and former representatives that are labeled as lobbyists. A lot of what they do is for many of them, they're not actually labeled as a lobbyist. They're labeled as consultants. They work for a number of companies, but they are not registered lobbyists, which their job is basically the same.
And that is primarily what I'm saying, that there might be a conflict of interest law that they may not be allowed to become a lobbyist, but they will find a loophole. Of course, a good example of that also is Toby Moffett. I'm not sure if you remembered him.
I do.
He used to be our U.S. Congressman, and of course, when he did not get elected, he became the attorney for Monsanto, and he's collecting a huge amount of salary for that. So these are just the things that are going on right now, and I'm not really sure, again, if there is a law specifically against doing this.
I don't actually remember either, which is one reason why the American Anti-Corruption Act is so needed in Congress. However, we will never get Congress to voluntarily vote for a bill that specifically prevents them and their staff. Their staff also very quickly get very good paying jobs. For example, the senator from Louisiana that just got that contracting job, she took her aide with her, and she's also now employed by them. But you will never get a senator or a congressman to even introduce the bill, which is one reason why the whole movement for the Anti-Corruption Act has to start at the local level.
So tell us what movement is that, Bonnie?
The anti-corruption.
Yes.
You can actually Google it, and it's the anticorruptionact.org. And it really outlines all of the ways that we can prevent the kind of undue influence that both senators and the House of Representatives actually have to fight off. We do have some very good senators and representatives, but they are few and far between. The majority of them really already know the kinds of jobs they can get. Let me give you an example.
Right.
I have a few examples. This woman was the special assistant to the Secretary and Deputy Secretary of Defense from 1997 to 2001. In 2001, she started at General Dynamics. Oh, a defense contractor. After going as their special assistant. So from 2001 today, she is now the chairman and CEO of the General Dynamics Corporation, and her salary is $19 million a year. $19 million. Her actual under that title is government contracting. So her salary is $19 million just from being able to spend about 3-4 years as the special assistant to the Secretary of Defense. That's one reason why people will do this. $19 million is what General Dynamics can afford to pay her a year.
In return, of course, General Dynamics
For the billion dollars of
billion-dollar contracts from
billion.
the government. So now the question to you would be, well, what's wrong with that? So what's wrong with that, Bonnie?
What's wrong with that?
So
Where do I even start? What's wrong with that is when you look at, for example, when President Obama was running for office, one of the things that he identified that was wrong was the number of lobbyists that the revolving door produces. And he said that he was going to end that practice. Of course he hasn't. I have some figures of how many lobbyists that have come through the revolving door are in all the different departments. The Department of Commerce now has the highest number of revolving door people that have gone through the private sector into government, have made their contacts, and are now back in the private sector, and then go back into one of the government departments. This happens continually. They have to update their contacts, but in the Department of Commerce alone, there are 1,736 revolving door employees, just in the Department of Commerce. The Department of Defense is the second highest number of revolving door employees. 1,688 people continually go through this revolving door.
Well, it is easy for us to identify that this is a revolving door position, but it may not be as transparent as that, Bonnie, because they may have a certain title that will allow them to do this kind of job without being caught as in that revolving door policy.
It's clear. I mean, they're not even embarrassed about it, Ben.
And unless you have a judge put a restraining order on all of these people that say, okay, when you get finished with your job working for the government, you are not to make a phone call, you are not to get near, say, 1,000 feet.
I mean, think about this. Let's just look at the Department of Agriculture for 1 minute, because both you and I know the damage that Monsanto was doing to not just the control of our food supply, but the actual quality of the food that we are now eating. In the Department of Agriculture alone, there are 1,112 employees that have gone through this, that have either worked at Monsanto, have worked at Syngenta, have worked at Pfizer's is another one that's producing a lot of. So all of those people have come from the private sector to the Department of Agriculture. Now, why do you think we're getting bills that are passed that are preventing states like Connecticut from actually, this last bill, the DARK Act, it's H.R. 1599. It's going to be coming up for a vote this week. And what it basically says is that it prohibits any state from enforcing a GMO labeling. You cannot label foods as GMO. You cannot even label them as non-GMO.
Or where it came from.
Or the country of origin.
That's right.
That's correct. You can't know whether what you're eating came from Honduras or Mexico or Canada, or whether it's a U.S. product, or whether it's coming from China with no inspections. You will not know. Even now, the way our whole food supply works, you have apples from the state of Washington that go to Asia first so they can be polished. When you look at all those beautiful apples in the grocery store, they look so pretty and they're nice and red. They look wonderful. It's because they've been shipped to Asia first, polished, and then shipped back.
What I like is about the chicken that they will be sending soon.
Oh, please, tell us about the chickens.
All our chickens pretty soon will be sent to China. And I don't know how they're
For
going
processing.
to do that. For processing, meaning that we send our chicken over there.
Dead.
Well, I'm not really sure if it's dead or
I don't know.
alive.
I can't imagine them
I
trying
can't
to ship
imagine.
live
If I were
chickens.
a chicken, I probably would get a round-trip ticket to go there. Of course, it'll be dead by the time you come back.
You come back.
But from what I understand, they're going to be processed in China because labor here is a little bit expensive for them. And, of course, when you send it to China, they'll have those feathers plucked out and all the guts are cleaned up and they're packaged neatly, and then they're sent back to us.
They're going to be packaged neatly?
Yes.
Well, probably. But what happens before they're packaged neatly?
Well,
there are no regulations here, Ben.
And in that concept, they said, well, it's nothing new because we're already doing that. And it has a lot to do with our seafood, our fish. We catch them in Alaska and we send them to China. They process them, send them back here frozen. And, so we have been doing that. And that is really getting, not just the work and the jobs out of the hands of the American workers, but it is basically something that is being encouraged right now.
Because it saves the company?
Because it's all related to what
Profit.
the company's bottom line is. And so the question really is, are we going to allow these things to go on? Most likely, we have nothing, we can't do anything about it, because if I were a sitting senator and I see that that senator did not get elected, and now he's earning $16 million a year working for Corporation A, who's going to be getting a contract with the government.
Don't even tell me you would be tempted.
And I'll probably say, when
Don't
I get
even
out,
tell me you would be tempted.
or if I get re-elected or not re-elected, I don't care, because I'm going to get that job. And for the next 4 or 5 years, I'll be one of the so-called consultant. So it is one of those things that, and I think it is very common nowadays in the government. Well, the problem with this is this, that it's not just doing harm to a lot of the things that are passed that are not really beneficial to the people, but it does harm the government. And if you remember Enron, that's exactly what happened in Enron, because their employees, they did not revolve around the door. They were still working for Enron, and then they were able to identify what they need, so they want to outsource it from the outside. And their own employee, their own vice presidents created some
Their other jobs.
corporation to put that product out so that Enron can buy it from them. And
Right.
this is exactly similar. That's what killed Enron, or at least that's what I understand. So for some unknown reason, there seems to be this shortcut between private corporation and the government. And I think the government right now is so huge and so big that it's now unable to just stand alone, but it needs all the other supporting cast to keep it going. And of course, when the whole thing keeps going, it just keeps on revolving.
Well, when you look at...
But
like
the other thing is this, that it doesn't give a chance for any startup company to say, oh, okay, we're going to compete with these big guys.
they'll give them contracts. No,
Well,
they do. There's
they'll
the
make
Minority
their
Act.
company,
You can have...
Yes,
So
there's the Veterans
you're-
Act. If you're a veteran
Right.
owned, that you're preferred to get the government contract. But again, this whole issue is, well, I'm
It's
going
not
to
the
get this
influence.
contract because
Right.
then I may be, my company, my small company, will be bought out by the big company, and I'm going to, get
Sit back
a
and-
lot of millions of dollars of
Right.
profit. So it feeds to the same cycle. And so there really is no fair competition. And if there's something that is not out there, then they will create a need for that and tell the government that you really needed this.
Right. Like, I forgot who was the chairman of, what his name is, of the FCC. but when net neutrality was, it looked like it was going to just be passed, so that you would have these superhighways for the cable companies, and for the elite few, they would have very high-speed service. When I looked at, I went through it to find out, well, where did this guy come from? And he was actually a lobbyist for the communication industry.
Well, I think this is one example, and it's a very rare example that the people won this case.
So far, right.
So far. But everywhere else, there are a lot of things that
we made it
the government contracted that really the small guys outside don't have a chance, because they don't even know that that is what the government
is doing
or needing.
Or who they are. Like when even the Environmental Protection Agency, and again, I forgot, I don't think he's the director or she's the director, but again, their previous employer was Monsanto. And my goodness, why are there no testing of these genetically modified produce in the United States? All the testing is done by Monsanto. Nothing, there has not been one test that's been given to the Environmental Protection Agency that has had a third party look at this. Now, because H.R. 1599 is coming up for a vote, I did send every single senator and every member of the House of Representatives that sit on the Agricultural Committee a list of 4 sources, including the Lancet. Maybe you might explain what the Lancet is?
Well, the Lancet is a medical journal, and it's a British publication, and it's one of the highest recognizable scientific journal in medicine. And basically, this organization supposedly cannot be influenced by any outsider.
And they do a lot of peer review for every article.
Any article that they come out has to go through the entire peer review. And so there cannot be in that journal a publication that is like biased towards some organization. And well, there was one time that it did got to be under the fire, because they did publish an article about the vaccine and how this vaccine caused autism. And since then, that article has been retracted, or at least corrected. But most medical journals are basically so well controlled in terms of originality and reliance to how it is reviewed before it can be published. So in any case, you were talking about this.
Yes, the article in the Lancet was just one. I had 4 scientific research reports that I also included to Representative Courtney. By the way, our House of Representatives, Joe Courtney, is not in support of having H.R. 1599 passed, so I was very happy to hear that. But it's more than just prohibiting the labeling of GMO products. It goes much deeper than that. What is really frightening is that for those of us who look for non-GMO organic products, they are going, within this legislation, they're making it even harder for someone who is an organic farmer, is not using modified seed, but is using real seed without the modified with, I mean, you can interbreed, you can breed specific traits in a plant the same way you can, right? I mean, that's a natural process when you cross-pollinate with.
The argument here is that there are farmers that did not buy seeds from Monsanto. You probably know that Monsanto owns that seed that they make, the GMO, and that they have the copyright for that, and the government gives them the right to be the sole user of those seeds.
We should have a discussion about the patent
So,
of life entity
So
at
when,
some
when
point.
that seed is planted on one farm, and for some reason the plant grows and then it flies out and the seed
It contaminates.
to the neighboring farm that did not get their seeds from Monsanto, Monsanto can claim copyright violations from that other farm,
Right.
although he basically did not willfully made that hybrid. But it
Doesn't
matter.
want he doesn't want this seed. First of all, his farm has been contaminated, and yet, in spite of the fact that somebody else contaminated his crop, Monsanto is allowed to come in, sue him for his patent, and some of the law cases that have been heard about this have been absolutely atrocious. But what I was trying to get back to was this revolving door, where here you have, like, this example of this one bill that's going into the House of Representatives anytime this week. You have a corporation that actually wrote the law, basically wrote that entire bill, is going to prevent an organic farmer who does not use genetically modified seeds, in order for them to label their own, they cannot label it non-GMO. That they've already said, because that sounds like a negative toward things that are GMO. So they're prohibited from labeling it as non-GMO. If they label it as organic, because Monsanto is going to be allowed to label it as natural. So, but if you have a farmer that wants to at least say this is organic, meaning that this is non-GMO, in order for it to be labeled that way, every single step of the food process, all along, they have to prove that it has not been contaminated by any GMO product. They have to, it's not up to anyone else. That farmer has to go through all of these regulations and steps to prove that when he harvested it, that nothing contaminated that crop. When he shipped it to a processor, that it was not contaminated during shipping, that the processor in no way contaminated that crop, and then when it's packaged and then transported to wherever, that has not been contaminated. They have to, this is in this bill.
Yes,
this
but,
is how outrageous this is,
yeah,
Ben.
but they don't have to go through all that whole processes and procedures anymore, because there are some states that had approved the labeling of non-GMO that...
This bill takes that away from them.
Exactly, that the Monsanto had been fighting those states individually, and they decided, well, we're not going to fight them individually.
Right.
Because we'll put a law of the land that says that from now on you're not supposed to be doing this. And where do you think those laws come from? Well, they are written by former elected officials.
That
Why
and, or former Monsanto employees.
Right.
The attorneys are now working over in the Department of Agriculture.
Right.
I mean, this revolving door is such a detriment to our democracy. I mean, Monsanto is more than just a detriment to our democracy. That's putting our health and safety at risk. Absolutely.
Well,
to prohibit the American people from actually having real testing done, to look at what they have done already, is scary.
well, it is, and we all know that, and we know what happened during the Gulf War, of course. We have Cheney, who is the president and vice president of Halliburton, and of course Halliburton got all the military contract going all the way down to transportation, as well as food processing and bringing food to our troops.
And your showers.
And then, of course, yes, and the shower and so on. And of course, they also have their own military convoy protection, which is at that time called Black Water. So it is one of those things that is just so in bed with what the government wants. But I don't think that the government probably even know that that is what they want until somebody from Halliburton told them that
you need this.
You need this. And so they said, oh, okay, we do need it, and well, we're going to put out a bid for a contract that will provide us with this kind of need. And they will probably say, oh, okay, I'll write you the specifications, and making sure that nobody else can satisfy that specifications, and we're the only one who can supply that service. So they get all, of course, the contract. Now, like you said, Bunny, there is a law that strictly prohibits all of this so-called revolving door, and there is always a loophole where they are coming in. It's like a whack-a-mole. If they cannot come in from this hole, they come into this hole. And the only way that you can prevent this, like I said, is just like do it just like what the court does, and that is to have a restraining order.
Well, that's actually what the Anti-Corruption Act does. Mm-hmm. It prohibits them from participating in anything like that for a 5-year period. For any of their staff, the period is less because they're not as influential. I think it's either a 2 or 3 year period. But it goes well beyond that. While they are in office, if they have had contributions or they have been given substantial benefit of being elected because of the support of, let's say, Monsanto has worked really hard to get certain people elected, when it comes to voting, that representative or that senator has to excuse himself and cannot vote on that issue. If he does vote on it, that whole bill could be null and void.
Well, the whole issue,
I mean, it's just a matter of ethics.
Comes down to, is this how the democracy system works? Because it looks like that there are a lot of things that we're talking tonight that is the negative side of democracy.
Right.
And this is something that we need to correct.
Well, the end result of this kind of behavior, Ben, is what we've got today. We have a non-responsive
it's the reward. It's the reward for being there for 2 years or 4 years or 6 years.
They get a reward. Do you know what their retirement is like?
Well,
after 4 years,
they want more.
So I mean, they have health insurance that is far beyond what we have.
They get all these benefits, and of course they want more.
Right, but that is not what...
This is where the pipeline comes into them. So who's stupid enough to vote and say, well, we don't want any of this pipeline anymore?
Which is why it'll never pass unless there is a movement. And that's what this movement...
You can have a movement, you can have them sign a statement.
Ben, wait a minute.
We are not going
Let me explain the movement first before you criticize it. Because if we start this type of a push for real anti-corruption, it can start in every city. I've already given the Norwich City Council the Norwich Anti-Corruption Resolution. In the state of Connecticut, we do not have a ballot initiative. In a ballot initiative, I'd be going around getting signatures to put it on our ballot, both in our city and in the state. But in Connecticut, since we don't have a ballot initiative, we're starting with the towns. If Norwich passed this anti-corruption resolution, it's non-binding. It sends a message. First of all, I think it's something the council should do. We've just had a number of discussions about Chelsea Gardens and the anger that people feel over feeling that they never had a voice. The fact is that this council, no, they were not responsible for for initiating Chelsea Gardens. For them not to come out and say, look, we can sympathize with you, that was done 23 years ago, but we will pass an anti-corruption bill, an anti-corruption resolution in this community so that you know this council will not behave in that way. So that would be a start. But it also sends a message to the state. There are several communities now that you have that have a similar resolution or ordinance that they are now considering. But when you have a number of towns the state can then be pressured to pass a state. And what state does not need this? Think about how many of our past governors have been in trouble
Or in jail.
have been in jail. I mean, we know that corruption exists, but it can be, you can at least have some control because the anti-corruption bill is more than just a revolving door. It would restrict people who are obviously influenced by private companies, by corporations, in restricting their ability to vote on critical bills for their constituents. So you really, if you are an elected official, you have to really make a choice between being a public servant, representing the people that have elected you, or a corporation that might want to try to buy you and your influence.
It's not even trying to buy them. This is just part of the staircase towards their career that they want to become.
But
it's just a stepping stone for them to go up.
Not for all of them, Ben.
That
I can quickly name you politicians that are not corrupted this way. Very easily. I mean, unfortunately, he was not reelected, but he's decided to run again. Russ Feingold, again, one representative that was not corrupted, senator, I'm sorry. Bernie Sanders, another one that is not corrupted. 19 years, he's never been bought off. Elizabeth Warren. There are a number of them, Ben, that really do care, that care about our democracy and their responsibility as defined by our Constitution for them to represent the people that elect them.
The line that draws, that red line that draws between corruption or non-corruption is really not very well drawn, Bunny. And you may say, well, yeah, he got corrupted. He could always tell you, listen, I'm not corrupted. I'm following the law, letter of the law.
Which is why we need a law like the anti-corruption bill. That would become law. When a bill is passed, it becomes law. So I really encourage you. You've never read it.
No.
You've never read it.
No.
I wish you would.
Because my idea of an anti-corruption law is to have a restraining order.
Okay. That's basically, that is in the bill. Read it and you will see that is in the bill.
You cannot even make a phone call to any members. You cannot even get close
That's correct.
to
That's correct.
the building.
That's correct.
Cannot
You're not
even
allowed on the
pay
Senate
for
floor.
Yes.
That's correct.
You cannot even pay for the lunch.
That's
you cannot
right.
even invite them to your place.
That's correct. Read the bill, because at the federal level, that's exactly what it does state. And then if somebody does cross that line, I mean, for me, there has never been a question. Nobody can buy me a cup of coffee.
Well, the whole issue, of course, is that there has to be a teeth, some teeth to the law, not just to the public official, but also applicable to the corporation. In other words, if this corporation tries to seduce this public
Elected official,
then they should be arrested or something like
yeah.
that.
This bill does not address that.
It should be.
Well, but this bill addresses the behavior of our elected representatives. And by the way, we have at least one state senator right now that has already signed and endorsed an anti-corruption bill for the state of Connecticut. We have one, I think there are 2 mayors that have already signed their intent to support this. There's also an agency in the state of Connecticut. Don't remember which one. I apologize because I wasn't doing that. So, but if there are a lot of people that are aware that if we're going to take back our democracy and have real influence, we should be the only ones who have influence with the people that we elect. It is their responsibility to take care of their constituents, to vote on behalf of what is in our best interest, not what is in the best interest of their future job or the company that is writing a bill, and I don't know what else they're doing for them.
But if you really look at this, this is direct bribery.
It is.
And,
it is.
And I don't understand why the Department of Justice hasn't really gone to this senators and congressmen and really go after them.
Well, for one thing, the White House has the largest number of staffers that have come from private industry. The White House is traditionally the executive branch's largest supplier of fresh lobbyists. The Office of the President employs a large team of staffers of varying seniority, but public servants switching to careers as lobbyists and then back again to public servants come from agencies as varied as the Department of Defense, NASA, the Smithsonian Institute. But the White House, and this is what Obama said he would stop. It hasn't. I think it's so lucrative for all of them, that just doing the job and having power is only one half of the reward people seek. Money is the other.
If you get a lot of money doing it, might as well be happy.
But 427 current lobbyists.
And that's on the list.
That's on the list. This is not the consultants. These are registered lobbyists. 427. How many representatives do we have in the... we only have how many senators? I should have counted up how many senators are actually on this list.
Yeah.
There's, 100 senators?
Take a look and see.
Well, it's two of these sheets. I have no idea. Goodness. All right, if you talk to the audience, I'll tell you right now, but...
well, you do have a list, but that is just...
You've got at least 60. You've got it 60 to 80.
And that is just the tip of the iceberg, Bunny, because there are some companies that just hire these either ex-politicians or people who used to work for their politician just to be able to write the contract in a way that it is acceptable to the government, which, by the way, when she was working for the government, this is how she wants it done.
And the other, just to give you another example, because the Department of Defense is obviously one of our largest contractors. They have the biggest budget. They have more federal contracts out there than any of the other departments. This was a 3-star general, did not serve in combat, but he served as the Army's military deputy of budget, deputy chief of staff for programs in the Pentagon. He was the senior military financial manager of the U.S. Army in the Pentagon. And more than 20 years of defense community experience in program management, strategy development, and financial working.
That's a very good qualification
for
a lot.
Yes, and immediately he went to Excelis, which is a defense contractor, and he's now making $6.5 million a year. But Excelis is also going to be bought out by, there's another company that's now buying, a radio company, I believe. So it'll be one of the largest military contractors again. So, it is amazing that there is this. It's so blatant. It's like fraud. It's like bribery. It's betrayal. It's beyond the pale, Ben, and it's so blatant. They don't even care that the whole public knows about it. And I think that that's one reason why people just get so discouraged and say, I don't care. I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to get involved.
Well, the movement to improve the governmental function is becoming to be very frustrating and disappointing to a lot of people. And for that reason, they just decided, well, gee, their voice aren't heard, and therefore, hey, who cares, So they might say, oh, yeah, we'll vote, but that's about all. But if you ask them to come down and march in Washington, they'll probably say no, because whatever we do, our voices will not be heard. Write a letter to your senator and to your congressman, and they will say, yeah, I did. And I have written so many letters, but I can probably tell you, I don't think that it made a difference, but I won't know.
You know, now with the internet, it is beginning to make a difference. You have, I forgot what the last one was that had over 1 million signatures on it. And it's not just making sure that your name is attached to some of these protests. If you don't say anything, if you continue to be quiet, and you say, well, yeah, I'll vote in November, the game's up. The game is up way before November of 2016. It's already been decided. I can't stress that enough, because once you decide you're not going to participate now, I mean, I feel like this is a revolution. Because if we don't revolt now and really do something, and I'm not talking about picking up arms, I'm talking about making the democracy work, being finally fed up enough to say, okay, I will not stand for this any longer. You have to decide. There are a lot of candidates out there, not as many Democrats as there are in the Republican camp, but I'm sure one of those Republicans has some sound ideas that you could support. Take a look at what candidate you really want. Don't listen to just what they're saying. Look at their track record. Look at what they've done. Find out and investigate. I mean, it makes me angry when I hear people lauding Hillary Clinton for saying we have to get money out of politics, when they have not even recognized the fact she's meeting with the her super PAC to coordinate a strategy for her. That's illegal, but she found a loophole. You have to really look at where they have stood, what they have fought for, and how they voted in the past. That's the only indication of how they will vote in the future.
Well, that's very nice for you to say that, Bonnie, but I still say that with the internet, you can actually tune in to a lot of things. That you can ask for the background of each individual.
That's right.
Candidate, and don't rely yourself on just reading the news media, because you won't see it there. What you'll read is Donald Trump, and he's getting the #1 media right now, and because he's running for president.
Right.
And well, unfortunately, if it is a popularity contest, then you'll probably end up voting for Donald Trump. Oh, by the way, he's the front runner for the Republican nomination. So, hey, that's what money can buy.
That is what money can buy. That's why it's important, because if we do nothing today in helping make the decision of who we want to be voting for in November, I can already predict who the two candidates will be. We already know Hillary is going to be the Democratic candidate, and Jeb Bush, in all probability, will be the Republican candidate. So, mark my words, if people don't get out and do something, it's already been decided. You can think that you just had a big impact, but it's going to mean nothing.
But this whole issue of your saying that and predicting that it's going to be Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush is the culmination and the fruit of all the things that they have done in the past. The revolving doors, the lobbyists, the signatures, and being the supporter and the donor for their campaign.
Right.
But this is where it's leading to, money.
To the presidency?
To the presidency. So that things will continue to happen the same way as it always has been.
Because the corporations don't want it to change.
And it doesn't make any difference whether it's a Democrat or a Republican sitting in that office, because who's behind controlling the daily life of every American are the big corporations.
Well, that's why, again, I think that when you look and you judge, you have to, there are, as I said, there have been really good representatives who have been ethical and moral and did the job of really trying to defend their constituents. There have been really good senators who have done the same thing. But they're never the ones that are put forth as the candidates. And I think that it's time that the American people decide that they're going to put forth the candidates that they want. We really had a lot of hope in 2008, when we thought for the first time we would have a candidate that was really willing to put his neck out for the American people. And I believed in Obama, at least initially first, until after the primary. And then they had the vote on FISA, and he voted for the FISA bill, knowing, I mean, even in 2008, we knew Americans, before Ed Snowden gave us all the proof, everybody said, well, of course they're spying on us, but I have nothing to hide. Well, you know, you get what you're willing to put up with. And I'm not willing to lose my democracy after you fought for it. My father fought for it. You know, I mean, there's no way I'm willing to lose it. I'm willing to fight for it. You had to fight with a gun. If you can motivate enough people, we can change this. I mean, I'm embarrassed by our behavior. I really am. I mean, I watch other countries where they have protests because they're fed up. And these are not democratic countries to begin with. But you have them out in the street willing to die to say, I want this freedom. And here America throws it away. We allow ourselves to be governed by corporations. It's time to stop. And speaking of that, we only have about 5 minutes left. I know you do have a place to get to.
Yes.
So if you,
we can go.
Well, we can close a few minutes early.
Certainly.
Okay. I'm hoping that next week we will have a guest from the Connecticut Sierra Club.
Okay.
I went to a meeting last night in Willimantic. There were about 70, 80 people there that attended. It was about fracking in Connecticut. We know what fracking is. We can explain it next week. But this pipeline is going to be coming through Connecticut. We don't just have pipelines going through the Indian reservations up in Montana and coming down from the tar sands in Canada. It's going to be coming right through Connecticut, and it will actually be coming through to Norwich and up to Massachusetts. So I'm hoping that Martha will be here with us next week. And the week after that, we have a guest coming in from the Connecticut Food and Water Watch, and she will be talking about both our food and our water supplies. So we hope you will join us next week.
And I'm Ben Hong. Good night.
And I'm Bonnie Hong, and good night for Norwich Confidential.
And thanks for listening.
Oh, we do want to give a big thank you first to Ben Lathrop, who was really wonderful at coming in and taking over while the two young men that normally are in the booth. Ben, you did a great job, and thank you for supporting the show. So we'll see you next week. Good night.